Hi, my name is Benny Garcia. This is Module 9, Case Study for Educational Leadership. Summary. Richard Inman, the vice principal of Rocket Junior High, was alerted of a situation by a school teacher in which they witnessed 15-year-old James hand a suspicious package to 13-year-old David Ramos, an honor student and promising trombonist. Vice Principal Inman, being from the socioeconomically challenged South Side himself, had been building a rapport with James, which had been working up until recently. Vice Principal Inman spoke to the two boys together and called in the school police officer. The officer searched the school bag of a non-responsive and visibly upset Ramos. The school officer found a pair of brass knuckles. The school has a zero tolerance policy for weapons on campus, which results in a trip to the DAEP and a 45-day expulsion. So, in a moment that validated Vice Principal Inman's attempt to foster ethical behavior, James confessed to coercing Ramos into holding onto the brass knuckles. Both of the boys were handcuffed and taken to DAEP. Subsequently, both boys' parents were notified, James's mother having a normal, almost glib reaction, and Ramos's mother being highly emotional. When the time came to file the paperwork for the expulsion, um, Vice Principal Inman filed the paperwork on James, but declined to do so for Ramos. The director of secondary education contacted Vice Principal Inman and notified him that refusal to file the paperwork would warrant an official reprimand, which would go in Vice Principal Inman's personnel file. Okay, so that brings us to legal and ethical issues. I think the biggest, there's several legal and ethical issues here, but the largest one for me seems to be that the zero tolerance policy for weapons trumped and overshadowed the situation of bullying that occurred and that just was completely not dealt with. So some laws that come into question. I used Kansas statutes as an example because I'm from Kansas. So there's Kansas statute KS 216302, carrying a weapon, specifically lists metal knuckles as having them as a Class A non-person misdemeanor. Also, the outlaw of bullying in school. So you have KS 726147, bullying in the district, any intentional gesture that would basically do harm to a student and deny them their liberty or right to education. This would be placing a student or a staff member in reasonable fear of harm, which is what happened with James and David, if we were to take the case study at a service level. Another situation is that David's last name is Ramos. So, upon further investigation, do we have any possible infractions of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964? Right, that no person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, be excluded from participation or denied the benefits of or be subjected to discrimination under any program, activity receiving federal financial assistance. I know that's kind of a large jump, but when as I continue, what I want to explore is the situation of bullying that just got, I guess, ignored basically, and so I want to continue on with that on the next slide. A couple other things too. If David was being bullied severely, but was immediately put into the criminal justice system for the zero tolerance policy, is there a possible violation of the 14th Amendment and of due process? Whereas the state um, shall not deny anybody life, liberty, or property without due process. So immediately, by having a zero tolerance policy, have you denied David any access to liberty? Another situation, there was the Supreme Court case of David versus Monroe County Board of Education. This one had to do with sexual harassment, but it also set the tone for something called deliberate indifference. The school can be liable when it acts with deliberate indifference towards severe harassment that is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it effectively bars the victim's access to an educational opportunity. In this situation, you have James, who is 15 years old, in junior high, so that's like eighth grade or seventh grade, physically intimidating a young 13-year-old David Ramos into basically carrying brass knuckles, which by, for example, Kansas statutes is a Class A misdemeanor for an adult. Other things to consider, Vice Principal Inman filed the expulsion paperwork for James and not for David, and breached his contract with the school district. Thus, breach of contract could result in immediate termination. Also, the school's obligation under Title VI, the 14th Amendment for Due Process of Law. So, did Vice Principal Inman's actions deny David his 14th Amendment rights? If David had been the victim of bullying, instead of addressing the incident of bullying and the school, instead of holding him accountable for the zero tolerance policy. So, in a nutshell, was the zero tolerance policy, did that provide an avenue for ignoring both due process and the situation of bullying? And if so, then you have an ethical dilemma, right? You have a right versus right. Okay, this is my synthesized sentence. A junior high vice principal in a socioeconomically challenged school district has decided not to file expulsion papers for a student, David Ramos, who was coerced by another student, James, to carry a pair of brass knuckles. Subsequently, the vice principal breached his contract by not carrying out his contractual obligation for the school's zero tolerance policy against weapons in school, and thus risks a reprimand for his personnel file. Okay, so here's some knowns and some unknowns. In regards to people, the people that are known are identified: the Vice Principal Inman, the school police officer, the reporting teacher, James, David, the secondary director of education, James's mother, David's mother. The unknown people, the principal, the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, the board of education, the state board of education representative, essentially high-ranking stakeholders. Also unknown, potential eyewitnesses, James's friends, David's friends, and one that I'm interested in is the band teacher, which I'll talk about later, and also James's and David's other teachers. Places. We know we're at Rocket Junior High in a socioeconomically challenged area where there are 900 students. So this is a massive school. We know the place where the exchange happened, and we know where the arrest happened, and that's the vice principal's office. What we don't know is where the students were before the exchange took place. Also, we don't know if we have CCTV or video footage of what happened, so that their testimony would match up with the video evidence. And because that arises too, is everything that the students are saying true? Program. We know we're in a publicly funded junior high. We know they're in 7th or 8th grade based upon their age and being in junior high. We know David is in the honors program and he is in band. We also know that there's zero tolerance policies in regards to carrying weapons on campus, specifically brass knuckles. Unknown, James's class schedule, the difficulty of his classes. We don't know the racial demographics of the school. We can assume that there's a high minority population, but that's an assumption. We also don't know if they have any bullying prevention or procedures. Because it seems to be, we know they have the zero tolerance policy, but we don't know what alternatives they have, if any, available. Here's some other things that we also know upon doing some independent research, that there have been extreme examples of applying zero tolerance policies. There's been situations at an elementary school when a student was suspended when he held a chicken nugget at a cafeteria monitor and said bang bang, and he got suspended. You can get suspended for in another situation. A student in another elementary school got suspended for having a Nerf gun in Florida after he forgot that the Nerf gun was in his backpack and brought it to school. So I bring the situation up because there have been prior there have been prior situations in dealing with zero tolerance policies and weapons, and it looks as though there's been more there's been harsh punishments for way less severe crimes. Certainly, a a pair of brass knuckles is more deadly than a chicken nugget. I also know that children introduced into the criminal justice system have a higher rate for recidivism. Once they enter juvenile detention, they are exposed to other at-risk culture. It's also more likely that once they go into the criminal justice system, it's likely that they will enter what is known as the school to prison pipeline. And once they enter the school to prison pipeline, because of these zero tolerance policies, it's likely that if David is introduced into this environment, that all the good work he's put into becoming an honor student and putting into trombone is going to, instead of steering him to university, will steer him to prison. Additionally, schools have been encouraged and supported in replacing reactive discipline plans that rely solely on negative consequences for rule infractions. Prevention approaches often address discipline on multiple levels, including A, general practices designed to prevent disruptive and violent behaviors in all students, and B, more specific practices tailored for students who are more likely to have already demonstrated disruptive or violent behavior. So in a nutshell, programs aimed at getting at the root of the problem as opposed to just relying solely on negative consequences, which is what Richard Inman is dealing with at Rocket Junior High. So we've got to review, we've got to prioritize, we've got to investigate. We have to investigate the level and extent to which David has been bullied. So if in fact David has been bullied, how long has the bullying been going on for? Also, David's last name is Ramos. Is David being bullied for being presumably Latino? And is that grounds for hate crime or harassment based on race? Additionally, do we know for sure that David is completely innocent? It is a possibility that David may have purchased the brass knuckles for whatever reason for James, and that James, using his newly developed sense of morality, took a bullet for David. Was David actually scared of James, or was David scared that he got caught? Those are things to consider, because it often happens times that good kids break the rules too. And also another thing to review and investigate is, has this situation happened at the school before? Specifically at the school, we know that zero tolerance policies have been violated across the country, but at Rocket Junior High, what happened and what were the previous outcomes? What are the other pressing issues occurring at this juncture? It's a school of 900 students. What else is on Vice Principal Inman's plate? And with whatever decision am I going to make, am I going to put the school's funding at risk? So these are some of the possible stakeholders that need to be taken into consideration and how they're going to react to the option that's chosen for Vice Principal Inman. There's the students, the parents, the teachers, the principals, the community, the business, local businesses, alumni associations, school advisories, also counselors, nonprofits. David, like everybody has some skin in the game. There's David, David's family, the school band, James himself, the reporting teacher, the stakeholders, the Board of Education, the entire student body, but also the first-time offenders. Because let's remember that David is himself a first-time offender. And being a first-time offender, does that warrant being thrown into the criminal justice system at 13? So when we talk about the conflict and identifying the conflict, I see the zero tolerance policy and the potential for deliberate indifference in regard to David Ramos being bullied. And so adhering to the school's policy and the terms of the contract versus keeping an honor student free from expulsion and out of the criminal justice system. That's the ethical dilemma I talked about earlier. The zero tolerance and the zero tolerance against weapons and putting a kid into the criminal justice system. Has the school acted with deliberate indifference in regard to the bullying situation? Immediately, David was put in handcuffs, and where there was no investigation as to anything that had happened with him and James prior to that, or with James doing similar things to other people. This is important because even though Vice Principal Inman built rapport with James, he could have been blinded by his emotions. He could have just related to James being from the South Side, saw him being nice to the vice principal himself, and then being kind of like maybe blindsided or having tunnel vision in regards to the actuality of James's interactions with students. Again, we got to look at CCTV. There has to be we do have to check and see. And if there were other eyewitnesses, I'm going to call this an integrity-based investigation. Inman, like, I'm not trying to cover my apples, but rather just trying to find out as much information as I can. Also, is there potential for a lawsuit or seeking damages? I mean, David, after spending time in DAEP, he could build resentment. I mean, is the damage already done? Is there trauma? Is there emotional distress that it could occur from Richard Inman mishandling the situation? And then who is liable? Okay, so this leads us to, I think, my favorite part of the presentation, the options, right? What is he going to do? What's he going to do? So option one is basically do nothing. It's like, okay, it is what it is. Here's the papers. Sorry, David, but rules are rules. Option two, refuse to sign. We have an all hands on deck investigation that culminates to being placed on the docket for a Board of Education meeting to request retroactively amending the zero tolerance policy to be used with a case-by-case basis and scenario. Additionally, we have this anti-bullying campaign, assembly, maybe social media storm. This would be coordinated with the local chief of police to organize perhaps a weapons surrender program in which, if you surrender your weapons, you won't be held accountable. Like, if you surrender your weapon, you might have, I don't know, I think you might be not exonerated, but the thing of where you can turn it in without any consequence. I think most importantly, too, with option two, is we want to advocate for a diversion program similar to the one in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That's a program called Bridges, where first-time offenders can attend a 90-day after-school program where they meet with social workers and career counselors instead of placing students in the criminal justice system. So basically, a diversion program for first-time offenders that will keep them out of, juvenile detention and keep them out of the criminal justice system. Option three is don't sign it, take the hit, and that's it. Just don't sign it and see what happens. That's option three. Option four, resign as a result of acknowledging own failure to handle the situation and to get a new job or possibly pursue a career change. That's a little extreme. And then option five, sign the papers, but pursue the policy change as listed in option one and use David as an example of a broken system. Okay, so here's the pros and the cons of each option. Option one, pros. The situation is handled. It's done. Vice Principal Inman can resume handling all the other affairs in his school of 900 students. Inman has not breached his contract. He has followed school policy to the fullest extent. He keeps his job, and he can provide for himself and for his family if he has one. The cons of option one, which was simply just signing it and moving on, is that David Ramos enters the criminal justice system. He becomes more at risk for falling into the trap of the school to prison pipeline. He is at higher risk for recidivism, and the future as a trombonist is in jeopardy. As opposed to heading to university, he could be heading to penitentiary. Other cons is, the other kids in similar bullying situations may not feel confident in approaching building leaders if they feel they are at risk of expulsion. So trust is compromised. So there might be a kid in a similar situation, but that's being coerced into carrying a gun, a joint, some cocaine, whatever, right? And this could be a good kid, and the kid wants to reach out, but they might say, yeah, but look what happened to David. James James forced David into carrying brass knuckles for him, and David was like a good kid. He played trombone, and he got he there was expulsion for 45 days, and he had to go to DAAP. I'm not going to go to the vice principal. So trust is definitely compromised, if not broken completely. Option two, the cons. So with not signing and advocating for a diversion program, Vice Principal Inman's integrity stays fully intact. He effectively advocates for positive change, not just for David Ramos, but also for James, for both the bullies and the bullied, um, and for first time offenders by tackling the actual source of the problem. He is genuine and transparent about his efforts to cultivate an atmosphere of safety and prosperity for his students. The con with option two is this a crusade? Is he going to die on that hill alone? Right? So it's the risk of hitting a brick wall with both with the Board of Education, also the principal, the superintendent, and other stakeholders might not agree with his handling of the situation. They might not see it as practical. They might see it as idealistic. They might see it as a waste of time and resources. How much time and effort will Vice Principal Inman lose by seeking to implement these programs and this specific policy change? There's a lot of dots that need to be connected, and anytime when you're having to work with the different taxing entities of the city and the county, mainly the school district and the county, especially either the sheriff's department or the police department, it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of people, and a lot of money. That being said, though, is it still the right thing to do? Option three, uh, David Ramos avoids entering the criminal justice system. David's future is not harmed by the situation. Option three, cons, potential termination. Option three was basically he doesn't sign the papers, but he doesn't do any advocation. He doesn't. Inman is like, okay, I'm not going to sign it, and I'm just going to go about my day. So the cons are potential termination. Also, there's no preventative action for dealing with another similar situation in the future. Vice Principal Inman cannot continue to breach contract without advocating for policy change. What if it happens again? He is he just going to keep not signing expulsion papers? And also, by not collaborating with other stakeholders, it gives the impression that Inman is being almost dismissive of the issue. Not that he is, but that's the impression that people could get. Option four, resigning. So, by resigning, David Ramos will refer, and when I say resigning and not signing. So by resigning, David Ramos will refrain from entering the criminal justice system. Inman could realize that he's not cut out to be an educational leader, and he can pursue a career that's less consequential and maybe possibly more accommodating to his life. Inman could be overwhelmed. He's like, man, if I messed this situation up, what else can I mess up in the future? And do I really want to be here? Option four, con. Inman keeps Ramos out of the criminal justice system, but he fails to advocate for future instances of students getting bullied and sent into the school to prison pipeline via zero tolerance policies. Also, Inman fails to utilize the full capacity to do good for posterity's sake. So, and also option five, right? Option five pro. This is where Vice Principal Inman signs the expulsion papers, but he also advocates for change. So there's no breach of contract or violation for school policy. He adheres to the policy, he signs the papers, he doesn't put himself in jeopardy. And also, the advocation for amending the zero tolerance policy continues. As for the implementation of a diversion program for first time offenders, similar to the one in Philadelphia called Bridges. The major con of five by just signing it is that David, again, enters the criminal justice system. He gets expelled, his future is in jeopardy, and there might be potential for a lawsuit if there was continued bullying that was met with deliberate indifference. Um, Possible 14th Amendment infraction of due process, and possible violation of Title VI. Okay, so what's the best option? What's the final decision? For me, eh, in the situation in the hypothetical of this case study, the best option is to not sign the papers and to advocate for a diversion program. So the final decision will require several steps, but will result in the best outcome for the most people. First, Richard uh, to launch an integrity-based investigation to have a full understanding of the situation. This will include talking to the reporting teacher, watching all the school CCTV footage to verify the narrative of the situation, seeking out other eyewitnesses of the situation, speaking to David's teachers to see if there had been other signs of emotional disturbance in the days prior to the event. And again, I want to especially include the band teacher. If David was an aspiring trombonist, it's really going to be important to talk to the band teacher because then it's obvious that that's where David spends a lot of time. And so somebody would have a good assessment of his character would be the band instructor. So this will require setting up a committee to research, advocate, market, and develop a singular mission to achieve the goal of implementing the diversion program. So after a clear and concise policy change request can be made to the Board of Education and a concise request can be made to the local governing authority, either the city or the county, for the chief of police or the sheriff's department to collaborate with the school district on a diversion program. Um, so in a nutshell, Vice Principal Inman needs to collaborate with the immediate stakeholders. There needs to be informal communication first, and then officially a committee set up if this is going to happen. Because it's going to be a step-by-step process, which is going to involve both, again, several taxing entities. Because we're talking about a diversion program that's basically run by either the police department of the city or the sheriff's department of the county, depending on where they're at in the country. And that's going to require monitoring situations that are going on inside the school district, which is another taxing entity. And again, organization and collaboration and transparency is paramount in the situation. So again, transparent communication and collaboration with the Director of Secondary Education must be established. Inman must be clear and transparent about his decision to request both a retroactive policy change and a zero consequence weapons surrender program and a diversion program for first-time offenders so they don't enter the criminal justice system, the school to prison pipeline, which is probably the most important aspect of this case study. We don't want David in that school to prison pipeline, and that's going to require collaboration with the local chief of police or sheriff, which would include potential involvement from municipal governing bodies such as the mayor, the local DA, the district attorney, or the county attorney, guidance counselors, nonprofit organizations, local ACLU representatives, possibly social workers. This also is going to include character witnesses for David Ramos, his teachers, but again, especially the band teacher. Because again, if David is an aspiring trombonist, it would make sense that David's band teacher has a fair assessment of his character. So thirdly, after completing and composing a comprehensive plan to begin a diversion program for first-time offenders with local governing bodies of the city and the county, Inman would request to be put on the docket for the next open meeting of the Board of Education. So there, an open record in which media would be present without Vice Principal Inman having to request them being there. They're just going to be there because it's a public meeting. I, or Inman, make three proposals. Proposal one, that a zero tolerance policy on weapons be amended for a case-by-case basis and that this is done retroactively so as to absolve David Ramos for any wrongdoing. Two, that in David's case and for all first-time offenders violating a variety of zero tolerance school policies, but also students without a criminal record who break the law, that a diversion program, such as the Bridges program in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, be established in order to address the true root of the problem. And three, and this one's specifically for Richard, that any official reprimand that Inman had received as a result of not signing David Ramos' expulsion papers be officially absolved. It's like, hey, also, I need that taken off my record, please. And so the urgency to establish a diversion program, um, I learned about from this video on PBS NewsHour, and this is from the brochure of that program in Philadelphia. It's basically keep kids in school and out of jail. And so these are some of the consequences of juvenile arrest. They have to do with fines. You could have massive amount of fines, jail fines, and bail. Military, you could jeopardize their chance to join the military. Privacy, juvenile records are open and available to the public, so it's out there. Immigration, so if you have a juvenile record, it could affect your immigration status. Expulsion, which is one of the most important aspects of this case study. So a child may be expelled from school for certain offenses, and information about delinquency judgments will be sent to the next school in which he or she enrolls. So again, it stays with them. It's permanent. Sentencing. The juvenile record for certain offenses can significantly affect the sentencing for a criminal conviction as an adult. Exactly. So David gets sentenced to a Class A misdemeanor, assuming we're in Kansas, right? And then again, let's say 10 years down the road, he um, just wrong place, wrong time, or he actually, for whatever reason, breaks the law. They look at his case, they're like, oh, I saw as a juvenile, you carried this very dangerous weapon as a school. So that definitely has an effect on future instances of sentencing. And DNA, a child adjudicated of a felony offense and some misdemeanor offenses is required to submit DNA sample to the state DNA database. So again, once you're in the system, you're in the system. Not just you, but your thumbprints and your DNA. So the reason the best option and the most ethical option is to advocate for a diversion program is the success that Philadelphia has had with their diversion program. Within the first year of the diversion program, not only did the number of arrests drop by 54%, but there were 1,051 fewer behavioral incidents with the SDP schools, right? So if you look at the graph, here's the incidents. Here's the incidents before the program and after the program. And just this short time, you can see that's a reduction of over half, which is unprecedented. And so during the first year, the police school diversion program had resulted in 54% reduction in the number of arrests at SDP schools from the previous academic year and was accompanied by approximately a 75% reduction in the number of expulsions and school disciplinary transfers. Schools also saw a 17% reduction in number of school-based behavioral incidents, indicating that school climate can improve even when students remain in school following minor incidents. Mainly, it works. This is just how the program works step by step in Philadelphia. The principal or the school officer contacts the PPD school, the officer. The officer then comes and reviews the case. Again, integrity-based investigation. What happened? And then for a low-level summary or misdemeanor delinquent offense, such as carrying brass knuckles, and if there's no history into this of offense, they go into this program. And it's in this program. It's basically a 90-day program where they meet every day after school with either a career counselor or a social worker, and they actually talk about the root cause of the problem. Um, and then also, if it's a high-level offense, then they would go the normal route. Okay, so what happens if this doesn't work, right? What's the contingency plan? So if in fact that the effort to successfully advocate for the creation of a diversion program in lieu of a zero tolerance policies fails to gain traction with the teachers, principal, local government officials, everybody involved, then the proverbial plan B would involve, at minimum, still refusing to sign the expulsion papers for David Ramos, and then reorganizing the efforts to establish a diversion program for Rocket Junior High, a socioeconomically challenged, high needs school. If advocating for the diversion program failed, Inman would need to take efforts to contact school districts across the country to see how they went about establishing alternatives to zero tolerance policies, such as Connecticut's school-based diversion initiative, Summit and Jackson counties in Ohio, which utilized a single mental health care provider in certain instances, and 3 middle schools in Washington state, both with positive results, and both with the lowering of infractions. Okay, so if option 2 is selected, there really isn't a plan B, but rather preserving and continuing to fight and advocate for creating a truly safe environment for students' rights to life, liberty, and intellectual prosperity. So if Inman truly means to foster and cultivate ethical behavior for students that come from the socioeconomically challenged South Side that he himself came from, then he must use his influence as a vice principal and collaborate with any and all stakeholders, students, and governing officials in order to adequately stymie the rapid rate that zero tolerance policies in socioeconomically challenged high needs schools, and to do so for the implementation of a diversion program for first time offenders in order to reduce the likelihood of them eventually ending up in federal penitentiary. What we're talking about, the best option, you know, Inman has to advocate for a diversion program to reduce the likelihood that David Ramos goes into the criminal justice system. And as a minority, it's more likely that David will go to penitentiary than university. This is my reference page. This was made with Screencastify and Google Slides. Overall, the case study. I'm not sure if this was required by the assignment, but I did want to say that I'm glad I did the case study because I didn't realize how. I knew there were zero tolerance policies, but I'm glad that I was able to watch the PBS NewsHour thing about the diversion program that happened in Philadelphia. I do believe, not to sound like cheesy, but that is an inspiring thing, the implementation of a school diversion program in order to reduce the school to prison pipeline. Because there's several problems already with the for-profit prison system that America currently faces. But this goes even without even realizing it. This starts before they're even adults with these zero tolerance with these zero tolerance policies. Um, and I thought it was really eye-opening and almost beautiful to see what has happened in Philadelphia, and that not only should that be happening in the entire state of Pennsylvania, that should be happening across the entire country. So I hope that that further diversion programs are implemented across the country in order for each student to truly pursue life, liberty, and intellectual prosperity for themselves and their futures and their loved ones. Okay, thank you.